This is the Troutbitten podcast.
Troutbitten.
Troutbitten?
Troutbitten.
Troutbitten.
Troutbitten?
Yeah, Troutbitten.
Troutbitten.
It's about trout. Wild trout.
This is Troutbitten.
This is the Troutbitten podcast. Thanks for tuning in. My name is Dominic Swentowski. I'm the owner of Troutbitten and the author of troutbitten.com. So we're halfway through season 9 already. And let me sincerely thank everyone who is involved with this podcast project. It starts with my fishing buddies that you hear every week. Bill Dell, Austin Dando, Matt Grobe, Josh Darling, and Dr. Trevor Smith. These guys have been the heart and soul of this whole thing from the beginning. Our show sponsors deserve a big thank you as well, because their support is what makes this a viable and sustainable project. It's about 10 to 12 hours of work each week to get each podcast laid out, recorded, edited, and published. And that simply could not happen consistently without our sponsors for this season. So thank you to Orvis, Squala, Smith Creek, Fooling Mill, Avid Max, Precision Fly Fishing, and New Trail Brewing Company. Last and most importantly is you, the listener. Thank you for your enthusiasm about the Troutbitten podcast. Sincerely, from all of us, thank you. Your weekly responses to these podcasts are overwhelming, in a good way. Your messages, donations, your use of those discount codes that sponsors provide, and just dropping a line to those sponsors to say thank you, all of that makes all the difference. Your downloads and listens have consistently ranked this Troutbitten podcast among the top 3 fishing podcasts in the world.
And
while while that still sounds crazy to me, it's been like that from the beginning, from really the first week that we launched. But if there's one thing we need a little more of, it's your comments on Apple Podcasts and Spotify. A simple positive comment and a 5-star rating goes a long way to keeping this engine running. So help us out there if you can. Now, I talked about the messages. We receive a lot of questions from listeners and a bunch of good ideas for the next podcast episodes. And without a doubt, there are more questions about nymphing than anything else. We talked a couple weeks ago about what has changed in fly fishing. Well, nymphing is a big one. Nymphing tactics are a hot topic. And while nymphing has been practiced for over a century, we are truly living in the golden age of nymphing. There are more styles, there's more information, and more acceptance of those styles than ever before. While nymphing was once seen as that thing you did when trout wouldn't eat dry flies or wet flies, more anglers than ever choose nymphing first as their go-to method for catching trout in all seasons. Because nymphing provides a unique complexity unlike anything else in fly fishing. And anglers who are dedicated to the craft take particular joy in seeing their refinements pay dividends, fish in the net. And that is to say, nymphing is fun. And in large part, what makes it fun is the control that is gained through tight line tactics. Indeed, the popularization of contact nymphing systems coincides with the popularity and the surge of nymphing among this community. One of the most frequent requests we receive is for a breakdown on the differences between the tight line styles. What is Euro nymphing, and how is it different than the mono rig? Can I tight line with fly line and a shorter leader? Is that called high sticking? What are the key differences between Polish, Czech, French, and Spanish nymphing styles? And how does a thinner or thicker tight line leader help or hurt my presentation? What are my options? That's a lot, right? But these are the questions that come in most. Troutbitten has become synonymous with the mono rig. And while each of us here spends lots of time with traditional leaders and fly lines, we all enjoy the benefits gained from tight line tactics when fishing underneath the surface. And I think these questions come in most because nymphing is, again, the newest thing in fly fishing. Of course, anglers have been nymphing for a very long time. But it's fair to acknowledge that a large section of the fly fishing world right now is centered on Euro nymphing, with new gear, new ideas, and new information coming out constantly. That's the way it is. So here we are. And our responses to the most popular questions that come from listeners will now come in 2 parts, 2 episodes, right? Tonight, Austin and I will walk through the differences between all of these styles, everything I just mentioned. We'll provide a little history and think objectively about how far the tight line game has come. It's kind of neat to look at. and to consider. And next week, the rest of the guys will join us to talk about the strengths and weaknesses, the advantages and disadvantages of all these styles, and what we call the standard, thin, and micro-thin mono-rig leaders. So let me introduce to you Austin Dando. Austin, I talked a lot there, buddy. Let's hear a new voice.
Hey, well, that's a lot to lay out. I mean, it is a lot of nuance and history, which we'll get into, all the layers that can be confusing. We're going to try to peel them back a little bit tonight.
Layers.
Yeah.
You agree. I mean, that's kind of where the innovation or the main interest is in fly fishing.
I would say so. It's most popular because it's a highly effective way to catch more trout than you used to, probably. And there's a lot of driving force, a lot of new interest and innovation, sure.
Yeah. I'm just saying, if you pick up one of the few fly fishing magazines that remain, you see a lot of that in there.
I'd say you definitely see a lot of it more now than you ever did.
Yeah.
5 years ago, it'd be like, oh, they actually they have something on your nymphing in here.
Yeah.
Now it's the front cover.
Yeah, absolutely. So the way we'll approach this, I guess, is a little bit like the skills series that you and I have done, right?
Mm-hmm.
The guys are going to join us next week. But for this week, it's not so much a discussion or a conversation or opinion as much as we kind of want to lay out more facts, I suppose. Lay out the way things really are, the way they were, where we are now, and maybe even where we're going.
Yeah. Yep.
So there are no listener questions tonight because this episode and the next one is essentially our effort to answer the most frequent questions that come in.
You're welcome.
That's right. You're welcome. You ready for this?
I'm ready for this. Let's give it our best.
All right. So let's first acknowledge that this will not be a perfect history of tight lining. That's my first disclaimer. Not even close. That's not our goal. That's not what we're trying to do. We're not trying to give you a perfect history. If you do want a more complete picture, there are good resources out there for that. And let me recommend a few books right now. There are websites too, but here are 3 good books to really break down a very good history. Paul Gaskell out of the UK wrote a book called The Fly Fishing Bible of Nymphing. I'm going to say it was 3 years ago. Maybe he published it, 2 to 3 years. That is a really nice breakdown of what it says. The Fly Fishing Bible of Nymphing. He covers a lot of different styles and just nymphing from the ground up. And you got over 100 years of nymphing. You really do. Kind of 1910 he goes back to. George Daniel, we've mentioned this book before. I still think it is one of the most influential books in fly fishing in the last, let's say 25 years. Dynamic Nymphing, George Daniel. And then another favorite of mine is Devin Olson, Tactical Fly Fishing. Within all of those books, let alone having great resources, great breakdowns of different styles and whatnot, there is some discussion in each of those books about the history, which is, again, what we're not going to try to do here real accurately. Not going to give you a bunch of dates and say this happened and that happened. And in part two, because there's a lot of disagreement about all that stuff. And people get very protective about who did what first and all that. Doesn't really matter, right? But I also want to point out that we won't cover this topic completely here either, right? That's another good disclaimer. You're not trying to give you a perfectly accurate historical timeline, and I'm sure we're going to miss stuff, right? So what are we even doing? Like, what's the point?
We're going to cover our bases and be broad, but give a lot of good general knowledge, as we're known for.
I think so. I will also say there are over 250 articles on Troutbitten on the website dealing with these topics. In truth, there are 2 books worth of articles on the Troutbitten website just on nymphing. Many more books worth of material on dry fly fishing, streamer fishing, and other stuff, right? Troutbitten also provides a category on the YouTube channel titled Fly Fishing the Mono Rig. I think there are 5, 6, 7 videos in that at this point. And while we've covered tightline styles many times on the podcast before, the most important one that prefaces this discussion is from season 1, and it's titled Fly Fishing the Mono Rig, Versatility and the Tightline Advantage Taken Further. And that's from October 2021. Seriously, if you're unfamiliar with some of the stuff we talk about tonight, go give that podcast a listen. That's a great start. Or dig into the Mono Rig page over on the Troutbitten website. You can find that in the menu. If you can't find it in the top menu, or you can't find anything you're looking for, get in touch with me. Or Austin will answer all your questions. Get in touch with Austin. Hey, this is almost like a skills series, so no joking around.
All right.
They're laughing.
It's all my fault.
All right, with all that said, Austin, what's the purpose of a tight line rig? Let's start there.
Sure. Great place to start. The purpose of a tight line rig is to essentially replace a fly line out of your rod tip guides with something lighter. It provides better contact to the flies, a more direct line to what's going on beneath the surface, overall better control, and without the sag and the mass out of the rod tip from a fly line. The best dead drifts happen, and dead drifts happen in general, is when we're in control of the flies. And being able to have a tight line rig is sort of that tight line advantage that we often talk about.
That's what I call it.
Strike detection improves too, because again, there's less between you and the flies, less between you and detecting strikes from the fish.
So I feel like every good tight line rig is built with the things you just mentioned in mind. And the first thing you're trying to do is really get rid of the bad influence of that fly line.
Right.
Quickly acknowledge that a fly line was not built to be fishing underneath the water. A fly line was built to push unweighted or very lightly weighted things to a target, air-resistant things to a target. Handles wet flies well. Of course, that was kind of the first use of a fly line, was to push those wet flies around, unweighted wet flies, not with split shot and stuff like that. And I've often said the original sin of fly fishing is adding weight.
Yeah.
As soon as you add weight, you're changing everything. And what you don't need as soon as you add weight is a fly line. The fly line now doesn't have a good purpose. Just doesn't. And that's sort of the heart of the whole thing. What you just said. You said you're trying to get rid of the mass, the weight, the sag, and that equals drag.
Yeah.
All of that comes from that fly line hanging out of the guides.
Right.
And if you've never, somebody who's never seen that, like somebody who has no fly fishing experience, would not understand that. But if you have, and I'm sure 99% of the people out there have experienced this, the fly line out of your guides sags. It wants to reach the water because it weighs a lot.
Right.
Put 10 feet of a fly line, even a 3-weight fly line or whatever on a gram scale sometime, you'll be shocked. It weighs a lot. That's its job.
Right. And the idea of high sticking or tight line nymphing, flies are always going to want to track back towards your rod tip. And when you have something outside of that rod tip that's quite heavy, it's going to drag the flies back to you even faster, and not in the way you want them to be presented. So when we can remove that, we kind of gain the advantage back again.
That's a good thing to bring up. Good point to make, that we're trying to get dead drifts. And so we're trying to let the fly do something natural, do natural things, drift with the current without our influence. And it's that sag, which equals drag, that then equals influence, unwanted influence to that nymph out there. Then it doesn't look good. Then the fish don't eat it.
They don't eat it.
They won't eat it.
How far back does this all go, Dominic?
When
did this really start?
Tight line nymphing.
Yeah, better get it right.
A couple years ago, like 2 or 3 years ago. As soon as Euro
somebody
nymphing
wrote
started.
an article.
Right. It goes back to when Euro nymphing started. Yeah. I mean, we talked a couple podcasts ago about how when you get into fly fishing, like that's your frame of reference. How everything is true. In the scene at that point, that's your frame of reference.
Yep.
And that's, what we're doing here, I think, is a valuable discussion to kind of maybe get people thinking back further, some people back further than what their actual frame of reference is.
Yeah. Because if you started today, you need to know that it wasn't always like it is now.
Right on. And so many things have worked.
And how we got here.
Yes. Yeah. And are people really catching more fish than they ever have? Probably not.
Yeah.
Right? Like the point is, like, old school stuff can work just as good, maybe sometimes better than like all the latest modern whatever. Right. So how far back it all goes, I've said this for a long time. I think probably from the time that monofilament was first extruded.
Yeah.
Monofilament was invented 1937, the DuPont company. I went back and looked it up. I thought it was 1940.
All right.
I've heard it was for something around the World War. What would it be, 2?
Yes.
Help me out.
So, it would be World War II, but I don't know what it'd be for.
I don't know what it was for. I didn't do that much research. Again, hey, not our job. You go look it up, right?
Yeah.
It's disclaimers right from the top. DuPont, 37, that's all you get. But really, from an early stage, I think anyone trying to get a nymph or some weight to drop through the water column surely realized that keeping line off the water allowed the weight to drop better. That's a tight line advantage right there. Keep line off the water, out of the water. Only what has to be in the water goes in. That's your tight line advantage. And man, weren't people understanding that from the very beginning?
Yeah.
I mean, any
basic fundamentals, right?
right, any fisherman who was out there on any kind of regular basis was understanding that. If they're trying to get weight to drop, they go, okay, just hold that up. Oh, that's less line on the water. Oh, that's hurting the drift.
Yep.
I think just people get it by fishing.
And dry fly anglers, for the sake of conversation, understood that too.
Yeah, Tenkara.
If we lay all this line on the water and we keep it in these different current seams, it pulls my fly out. I don't want it to do that.
Mm-hmm.
All right, I'll just raise the rod tip, and then now it transitions to fishing underneath for the same reasons.
Oh, that's a great point. I'm glad you brought that up. I hadn't thought of that. That's what Tenkara is, and Tenkara goes back so much further than what we're talking about here.
Yeah,
that's a great point. That principle definitely holds up top, and we do that all the time, right?
Mm-hmm.
Anyway, what we just described is high sticking.
Yeah.
And I think if you take these terms, high sticking, tight line nymphing, contact nymphing, Euro nymphing, Czech, Polish, French, Spanish nymphing, monorig, if you take all of those terms, I think the first one is high sticking.
I would agree with you. That's the first one I remember.
Mm-hmm.
Now, high sticking in itself, when we talk about that, it's a little bit more free form. So you could say high sticking, you might have a little bit of fly line out of your guides. But the point is that you're not fishing far away from yourself. You're in close. Those flies are tracking back under the rod tip, which is not far away from you.
No.
You're just keeping all the drag and sag and some of the mass out of the system.
Yeah. Yeah, you don't need a special leader to high stick.
Yep.
People were just high sticking way back when, whatever, with their 9-foot leader or whatever. Make up your own story.
Yeah.
You can high stick with any system. Stay close. Now, when we say close, we should put a number on that. Rod length away. 2 rod lengths away. Woo, that's getting pretty far for high
right. You
high
start
stick.
swinging stuff.
Yeah, because if you have any fly line out of those guides, again, it's going to cause that sag and drag. So high sticking happens close. And you got to pick the right water type for it. It doesn't work everywhere. You can't just you're not going to high stick some long flat, the kind of flat where you're pushing waves in front of you. If you walk, if you take 2 steps, you're like, oh, I pushed away. You can't high stick that. You're too close to the fish.
Yeah.
But you can very effectively high stick fast water.
Yeah, broken water, pocket water.
Yep.
You can get very close to in those scenarios. Again, fishing close to yourself. It's a great point. Not so easy on a flat.
Right. Whether it's after a fishing trip or at a backyard fire, you can bet the Troutbitten crew has a case of New Trail Broken Heels along with us. It's honestly our favorite beer. This hazy IPA is smooth and full-bodied. Hand-selected Citra hops lead to notes of bright clementine and juicy ruby red grapefruit. Broken Heels is a keeper. New Trail beer is proudly brewed in Williamsport, Pennsylvania, and delivered cold to your favorite craft beer retailer every week. At New Trail, it's not about being the best angler. It's about getting out there. So enjoy nature's moments and reward yourself for a day well fished with New Trail Broken Heels. It's Troutbitten's favorite beer. As fly anglers and tyers, we understand the value of having the right tool for the job. AvidMax.com offers over 20,000 products and the knowledge to help you find the right tool for your job, whether that be at the tying bench or on the water. Listeners of the Troutbitten podcast receive a special one-time discount code at avidmax.com. Enter the code TB10 at checkout on full-priced items to save 10% off your order. Orders over $25 ship for free, so you can put more gas in your tank or beer in your cooler. For all things fly fishing and tying, elevate your game with AvidMax. So to high stick, you don't need a special leader necessarily. You can very much high stick with the leader that you have.
Yep.
But you can certainly refine this by using a longer leader and eliminating unnecessary taper under the water.
Mm-hmm.
So let's have a quick diversion here, away from the styles real quick. This would make a good podcast, really, a full podcast on this, but we're just going to do it for 3 minutes. Right? There are 3 things that make any tight line system work. I have a presentation that I often do on this, and I'll do that for an hour. So,
I like it.
But 3 minutes, man. 3 things that make any tight line system work. What do you have?
Well, the first one, we're going to eliminate or minimize any negative effects of a fly line.
Right on. You brought that up, the first point. That's why it works, right? That's why a tight line system works. That's why we use it in the first place. Number 1, yep.
Yep. The next thing we're going to do is incorporate a sighter, which again is in addition to what we would standardly call high sticking method.
Sure, right? It's an add-on.
And the next thing, which you just said, is no taper under the water. 1 diameter of tippet, throughout the rig to the flies.
Yep. Those are the three things that make any tight line system work. Now, that doesn't mean that all three things are always included in every tight line system. And those rules are often bent. Like I say no taper under the water. And I used to say no taper under the water. And it's always going to be just all 4X or it's all 5X, whatever. Whatever.
Yep. Yeah.
But now I break that rule all the time. I wrote an article about this. I said 2 diameter solution to a 1 diameter problem. Clever, right?
It's a good title. You're good at titles, yeah.
But that's my point. I break that rule a lot. I'll go 3X to 4X, 4X to 5X, because I like to control the breaking point when whatever, we break off down there. There are other reasons I do that too. But we at least want to limit the diameters under the water. You don't want OX, 1X, 2X, 3X, 4X, 5X under the water. That taper, gets dragged around by the currents. Just sum it up and put it that way. And if you've never experienced that, if you've never really thought about it or seen it happen, try it. Put a taper under the water like I just described, and then just go flat 4X, straight 4X, and you'll see there's a big difference.
Yeah. And the reason that happens, just to clarify even further, is if you can imagine, a tapering down to dramatize things, a cone shape of your leader going from thick to thin at the bottom, and you're going through different water columns that are going different speeds. Yeah. And when fast water hits that really thick part of the taper, it's going to whoosh it away and want to push it hard. And when that slower water is pushing against the thinner diameter, it's not nearly going to be moving at the same speed.
Right.
So that's when you get that unnatural presentation.
Whooshing. That's the term.
That's technical.
Yeah, that's what happens.
It gets advanced when you start whooshing stuff.
So we said about these 3 things. Eliminate that fly line in many different ways with many different leader builds. We're always trying to just eliminate the negative effects of that fly line. We talked about the third thing being this taper, eliminate the taper. But then that second one of including a sighter, that's a big one that was missed for a very long time. A sighter, come on, we all know what that is. The most basic sighter is a piece of colored monofilament. Why weren't people doing that more often a long time ago? And some were. But it really did kind of take the competition scene to make that popular.
Yeah, I would agree.
That was the biggest change in what I used to do for a mono rig to somewhere around 2003 or 2005. I was like, oh my gosh, why didn't I put a piece of colored line in the middle like these other people are? Yeah. And that makes all the difference. I still think that is more important maybe than even the butt second, than taking the fly line out. It shows you everything. But we'll do a full podcast on those 3 things that make it work. Again, I think I will link a bunch of Troutbitten articles, which are good resources, in the show notes for this one. I usually put a couple. I'll probably put like 8 or 10. So let me bring this up too. Here's more on our quick diversion. But as a kid, I watched fishermen drift worms and minnows on a fly rod, or with monofilament on the reel, on the fly reel. Fly rod, fly reel, monofilament, not fly line. They did it. I'm not quite sure why they did it instead of using a spinning rod. I think it was for the reach, mostly for the reach of the extra length of the fly rod. Maybe there was more though, and maybe they did like hand lining, right? I saw people doing that. Now, picture that, right? And if you replace that worm with a beadhead stonefly, what do you have?
Microleader.
Yeah, that's it.
Pretty similar tightline rig to what we're talking about.
You have a tightline rig.
Yeah.
And let's say they were using 6-pound Berkeley trilene, right?
Yep.
You have a micro thin mono rig is what you have.
Right.
Honest to God, that's what it is. And I think it's cool to acknowledge that.
I think it is too.
You know?
Yeah, because that's one of the first comments, especially from maybe a skeptic, or maybe, you're really doing out there is this? Yeah, I mean, that's what I'm doing. I have thin mono on, but there's a lot more to it. But yes, that's what I'm doing.
Well, we've come a long way in the acceptance of all of these styles too.
True.
I published the first mono rig article in 2015. I called it "The Mono Rig and Why Fly Line Sucks." Yeah. And then I gave presentations on it. It really hit hard. I mean, that article,
I remember that,
really opened up a lot to Troutbitten, but especially to a lot of people. They went, whoa, wait, what are we doing? And so the main question I used to get all the time was that really fly fishing? Yeah, it is. And we had a full podcast on what is fly fishing, what is not fly fishing. Anyway, you're hand lining and you're using flies. Good. You're not cranking in every time. You fly cast, all the stuff. But it's a different discussion. But yeah, bait fishing with monofilament. That was happening. right? And so if somebody was like, well, I can't get those minnows today. I wanted to fish minnows. I can't get them. And then your buddy over there has this, whatever, stonefly. At the time, not a tungsten bee, but like with split shot or something.
Yep.
And you go, okay, let me put that artificial nymph on there. And there you go. All of a sudden you're nymphing.
Yep.
All of a sudden you're not bait fishing, you're nymphing. That's what it is, man. Now
I like that.
we'll get into if you had 4-pound or 6-pound Berkeley trilene, you can't really cast it the way that I prefer to cast it. But if you had 20-pound on there, you can do fly line kind of casting styles and another whole podcast, right? Like different things you can do. And we'll talk about this a lot next week. 20-pound butt section is so much different than that 5-pound butt section.
No, not even the same thing.
Right? Lots of different things here. So high sticking is close range. And I'd argue that all the other rigs that follow are just a simple effort to expand that range. We said like high sticking has to be close, but people just wanted to take it further out.
Sure.
Good things happen close up, yes, but anglers like fishing further away.
They do. That next bank, that far bank.
Yeah.
I had my friends and I, when I was young, we used to joke about if you can cast it really far and get it really deep, that's when you're going to catch trout. It's this like fisherman's instinct that if you can just get to the next reach, no, they're over there. They're not.
Grass is greener, man. It's not just fishing.
Exactly what it is. Grass is greener. It's
on the other
it's
side.
not when it comes to drag.
That's the truth.
Now, there are certain situations where the trout will require a little extra distance.
Sure.
Things like low, clear water.
Yeah. Flat.
Sure, flat. Anytime that your presence can be easily known is a good time to keep your distance back. For the most part, though, we're looking to be as close as we can rather than as far as we can.
Yeah. That's a great point. That's always my instinct, is to get as close as I can. I'm not trying to do distance, no hero casts, like Bill says.
Right, yep.
Again, so high sticking was a thing, and then they just want to go further away. I just think all these things were probably happening all around the world with people with monofilament in their hands and then trying to get nymphs and whatever down.
Yeah.
And they just wanted to take it further. And so all of the things that happen next and all of the stuff we fish with now are just an effort to just get a little bit further out there, or a lot further out there. I will say, I think 30 feet, it's the maximum effective range at which almost all these rigs fall apart. Okay, 11-foot rod, tallest person that I know, whatever, right? 30 feet, I'll give you 32. I'll give you 32 if you're 7 feet tall and you have an 11-foot rod, because that matters. And the rod length matters, right?
It does.
I used to fish with an 8.5-foot rod, and I have a 10-foot rod. That probably gave me an extra 5 feet on my effective sagless reach.
Yep. This is huge.
Understand. Yeah, it is. I tell my guests this a lot this year. I say, like, this monorig system is a short, all tight line tactics, or a limited range system. You don't want to just fish 10 feet away. You might be too close, and even if you're not spooking the fish at 10 feet, you don't have any drift. You put it in 10 feet, where are you going to go? You're back to yourself in like a second, right? So you don't want to fish 10 feet away, but you don't want to fish more than 30 feet away. And 30 is really starting to, really pushes it. So I tell people like 25 feet. And again, like really somewhere between 15 and 25 feet. That's your range. You got like a 10-foot range to be casting in. That's it. And you move your body around a lot.
Yep.
The tight line angler wades a lot. And that's it. I don't want to be 10 feet. I want to be basically 15 feet or more. Well, not 30 feet, not 35, my gosh, right? And really 30's pushing it. So 25. You have like a 10-foot range.
What is it? What did Josh refer to it as? The Troutbitten golden rule?
Golden ratio. I use that every day on the water. I tell people that all the time.
Is.
What we're trying to do is be one rod length. Well, if you're facing upstream, you want to be one rod length away into the river, and then 2 rod lengths upstream. One rod length over, 2 rod lengths upstream.
That's the sweet spot.
I say 2 rod lengths upstream plus. So if I got a 10-foot rod, I want to cast about 22 feet away.
Yeah.
Yeah. Anyway.
Golden ratio. Love it.
I say it all the time. That'll help you. When I'm not catching fish, that's what I do, is I get back to a few general principles like that help you dial yourself back in, because that's what it always is.
Exactly.
You've taken the tactic into a range where it can't succeed.
Yeah. And you lose those tight targets, which we talk about a lot too.
Right on.
When you're that far away and you want to run a small seam along the backside of a rock, and run it parallel to that seam and have both flies do it, it's really hard, next to impossible, to do it 32 feet away from yourself.
Yeah, so true.
Stuff just gets out of control.
It does. So before we get off a tangent too much, we'll talk more about those specifics next week. I like that. We talked about high sticking, and now let's go to mono rigs, because I really think that's kind of the next thing. As far as literature goes, that's what you're going to see next. That's what was in print next anyway, is mono rigs. Again, we aren't aiming for a perfect history here, but that's what's next. Over time, various anglers were using leaders built of many different lengths and of designs and materials to try to take the high sticking thing further. The high sticking's great. Then you went, well, I can't always be 10, 15 feet away. So just in our area, we've acknowledged this before, just in our local area, the guys we know about personally, we've shaken hands with. There's Joe Humphreys in Trout Tactics, writes about the mono rig.
Yeah.
We all love that book.
Yep.
1980, 82 or something, it was published. And he talks about the mono rig, which is why I still call it a mono rig. And then there's Dave Rothrock, who was basically using gold stren and blue stren.
Right on.
A leader that he still uses, a variation of that same leader. Those are two guys just in our area that were doing these things that it was a mono rig. He'd taken a high stick nymphing rig further out.
Exactly. To the next thing.
Making it longer, that's all.
Yeah. But again, back then in the 80s, that wasn't a topic that was very well received in the industry. It wasn't really talked about a whole lot either. What was it? Did Humphreys have an article get rejected or something from?
Yep.
Do you remember that?
Jay Nichols was the editor. Isn't he still one of the main editors for Fly Fisherman magazine? And he told me that Humphreys sent them an article on the mono rig like in 2000, around that time, early 2000s. They said, well, we can't publish this because it's a fly fishing magazine. And, it was in his books.
Yeah.
But that's a good point. It's like, it wasn't talked about that much because they weren't fly fishing. We always like to say it that way.
Do you know if that article ever did get published?
I don't think it did, no. But I'd love to read that.
That's what I was just going to say. I'd love to find it.
I think people just weren't ready for that idea, that fly fishing under the surface could be done better without the fly line. But that's a fact, And instead, they were using, I'm going to say, a much less elegant system. The standard American way of nymphing at that point, the standard way was, your fly line, your 9-foot leader, and your bobber, and then underneath your bobber.
Yep.
And that's a good rig. It is. It's a good rig that does its own things, but it is not nearly as elegant, let's say. It's not as efficient. You're not in as much control. I don't think it's as much fun. I use it for certain situations.
Right.
We won't get into all that, but there are definite uses for that. I'm not saying it's a bad rig, but this rig is just as legitimate. And in my opinion, it's much closer to the heart of what fly fishing is in the first place.
That's an interesting point, especially when we'll talk about how we cast them and how we still kind of keep the fundamentals and make the fly rod do the work that you always ask the fly rod to do. It's not casting and waiting, or the chuck and duck as so called.
No.
Very good point. I like that.
I've always felt like that. Like it's much more, I guess I keep saying elegant. It's an efficient way to cast.
Yeah.
And just to fish. You don't have a bobber in between you and the fly. You don't have a fly line in between you and the fly. The fly wants to do its own thing. If you take that rig I just talked about, you're trying to control 4 different things. You're trying to control your fly line, your leader, your bobber, and your fly. And what we're trying to do with the mono rig basically tries to control 2 things.
Yeah.
The leader and the fly. So it's more efficient. Good way to do things.
Yeah, I like it.
Anyway, I brought up Humphreys and Dave Rothrock. And those are just 2 guys in our area, but surely there were many other anglers around this country and around the world that were doing very similar things. It's kind of coming to the same conclusions, coming to the same rigs and the same kind of ways of fishing, solving problems in really the same way. That's how inventions go all the time, right?
Yeah, out of necessity. You're fishing with this fly line, it's really dragging a lot. What could I do? Well, I could get rid of it. I could get rid of it for the most part. So that's what they did.
I could take it further, yeah.
Yeah.
So we're saying like people weren't really ready for that idea in the 80s and even in the 90s.
Sure, a lot of resistance.
And I'm going to say until the internet and Euro-nymphing.
Yeah, internet.
The internet changed everything, obviously. But the internet and the introduction of even the term Euro-nymphing, all of a sudden, People were more ready for it.
And along with the internet, the other thing that also really popularized Euro nymphing and tightline tactics was the competition scene.
Yeah.
And that's fair. That's the majority of the style that they fish. So it makes a lot of sense that they would put a lot of publicity on that.
Yeah.
But I could say at the same time, there was plenty of internet forums and little websites that were having discussions outside of the competition scene too.
Oh, yeah.
People were just curious and learning and trying to figure it all out, kind of.
Yeah. Internet forums were a big thing at that time.
Yeah.
And you and I'm sure you were too. I was, that's where we got a lot of our ideas, information. You got to know people and stuff too. That was, yeah, like you said, there were a lot
cool.
of people. Yeah, it was a good era. It was better than like Facebook. It was.
Oh, yeah.
So much. The internet was new and everybody was just sharing ideas. And the more you understand, well, a tactic like tightlining, the more you go, shit, that makes sense.
Yeah.
Oh, okay, well, let me try that. And then you try it. You go, oh, this, I do like this. This is great. Anyway, that information, just that sharing of ideas. And again, I think you brought up a good point with the competition scene. They were all sharing more ideas than ever before, I'm sure. And then people learned that there was a competition scene in the first place.
That's true.
So everything obviously took off. Whatever you're into, it was all of a sudden available on the internet,
Yeah, I know mine has that grown.
Right. So these styles, Czech nymphing, Polish nymphing, French nymphing, and Spanish nymphing became part of the lingo. Eventually, the term Euro nymphing encompassed all of that, all four of those styles. It really took on a life of its own, partly because of the internet, and then partly because the industry loved the term, and so did anglers. And so get into this for a minute. So now we talked about monorigs a bit. So Euro nymphing, and that's kind of where we are now on this timeline. You remember Trevor a couple years ago in the podcast saying, you remember Trevor's quote about Euro nymphing? He said, "This is how you can be a nymph man and still be elite."
Yeah, nymph man. I do remember that.
Right. It's one of the best things ever. So Euro nymphing is that term. I say,
it's
like
so true.
It gave cover to the tactics of nymphing, where nymphing was like that knuckle dragon thing, maybe not that much, but like I said, people wouldn't nymph so
Old
much.
School.
Right. And then that tight lining stuff, is that even fly? But yeah, it is. And it's called Euro nymphing,
Yep.
Now you can
Now
still
you
be
know.
elite. That's
Yes.
right. Now you know. What a brilliant term. Whoever came up with that, right?
Yeah, it gave validation to the whole thing.
Validation.
Now
That's
it's
the
a
word.
category that is accepted, and you can dive as deep down into it as you want.
Yeah. I'll say too, like the competition scene legitimized those tight line tactics. Competitions weren't always Euro nymphing, by the way. We're about to get into that, right? But that competition scene, all of a sudden you're like, well, hey, if the top anglers in the world are doing that, then, must be a really good tactic.
Yeah.
You have the interest from the internet, the information from the internet, the term, like you said, validation of the term Euro nymphing.
Yep.
People like to say they're Euro nymphing. People like to say I'm a Euro nympher. And then now it's gotten so popular now that there's backlash against it, which happens everywhere.
There's memes. And,
right.
It's so
And
good.
you know that most of us have never liked the term. We're about to get into that because of how it limits things. We get into that in a minute. But let's go through. The reason they call it Euro nymphing is because it encompasses these other styles: Polish nymphing, Czech nymphing, French nymphing, and Spanish nymphing. Now, I'm not the expert on this stuff, right? But I've been around it long enough to kind of understand a few things. 1989 at the World Fly Fishing Championship in Finland, a guy named Vladdy outscored everyone by a ridiculous margin by using a monorig with heavy nymphs that he moved a little faster than the current. That's kind of important to remember that. It originally wasn't really dead drifting.
Right. That's different.
It is different. And when they won't eat your dead drift, do what Vladdy did. Move your flies a little faster. Anyway, different thing. That kind of kicked everything off in the competition scene. Everybody wanted to do the same thing, similar thing, and then whatever, variations on that theme followed. So Polish nymphing is a relatively short leader. We're generalizing here, right? Sometimes there's even some fly line out of the guides. And there was no sighter in that Polish nymphing leader originally. Vladdy had no sighter. Close range targets, again, close range tactic. Pick the fastest water, and just that's where fish are usually feeding anyway. It's a food factory of a river.
Yep.
And what's that sound like?
Sounds just like high stick nymphing.
I think so too, right? It's high sticking.
Yep.
And Vladdy's the one who brought high sticking basically to the competition scene with, I'm sure, nuances. And then you have check nymphing, which anglers get really bent out of shape about the details and differences and about who was first. That's not our mission here. Don't really care who was first. Just trying to say, like, the point is that check and Polish nymphing are very similar in the fishing style. It's more about the difference in the flies themselves and maybe how they're positioned on the line. Now, I'm going to tell you the truth. Where I understand all that from is those 3 books that I mentioned up above. And plenty of websites. And I think if you're into this stuff, you've already heard these stories and how all of this stuff developed, right?
Yeah. And it's funny, if you ever talk to Joe Humphreys about any of this, he has a famous line he likes to repeat is, I was check nymphing before the Czech Republic was a country.
There you go. Yeah. That's kind of what we're saying.
But it's true.
It's
right?
true. It is.
Yeah.
And it doesn't matter who started it first, right?
No, it really doesn't.
I think, though, it's good to acknowledge that all of those old tactics, call them that, caught just as many fish.
It's so funny to call them old. Yeah.
Caught just as many fish. And if you're looking for something new to do, go back and do some of the old stuff too.
Yeah.
Precision Fly and Tackle is a family-owned business with a passion for the outdoors and a sense of adventure. They are anglers who enjoy every moment spent on the water with family and friends. Precision Fly and Tackle carries the widest selection of Euro rods, reels, lines, leaders, flies, and accessories. From the beginner to the advanced angler, Precision Fly and Tackle can outfit every angler, no matter the budget. Visit them online at precisionflyandtackle.com. Then use code Troutbitten10, that's the number 10, for 10% off your order. Gear up with Precision Fly and Tackle for your next adventure. For over a decade, Smith Creek's high-quality fly fishing accessories have helped anglers just like you to keep your gear in easy reach, free up your hands, and keep our waters clean. Their award-winning Rod Clip Plus now has 2 ways to attach it to your vest or pack, making it easier to tie a fly, change a hook, or release your catch. All Smith Creek products are built guide tough, using rugged materials and backed by their strong commitment to customer service. This fall, Smith Creek is introducing even more new products, so keep checking their website at smithcreek.co for more information and special offers from now through Christmas. So that's Polish and Czech and French nymphing. If you look around, you'll find accounts of people using French leaders, what they called French leaders, in the 80s. So generally, French nymphing, especially originally, longer leaders, lighter flies, moving the flies less, allowing them to dead drift, longer drop times. So again, maybe truer dead drifts.
Right. Sounds like it.
Casting upstream, keeping everything real deliberately in one lane. Longer casts, but listen, like not necessarily longer drifts. You know, you're casting further away. Just because you're casting 30 feet away doesn't mean you're kind of going to try to drift 30 feet back to you.
Yeah.
I think what French nymphing just really was just expanding the range of Czech and Polish nymphing, which is high sticking.
Yeah.
Which is, again, what people were trying to do with mono rigs and just trying to get things a little bit further out.
Right. Keep pushing out.
That's what we said from the beginning. Like, you take a basic principle of a tight line advantage, and then you just want to go further. So a French nymphing leader casts a lot like a fly line, and it can do the work. It can do the work of casting a dry fly. And our standard mono rig, what we call Troutbitten standard mono rig, is a pretty similar leader build.
Yeah.
A little bit shorter taper, a little bit thinner butt section, for my preference. On that, you guys kind of do different things.
Right.
If our standard mono rig is closest to anything, it's that French nymphing leader. And man, there are, probably 100 variations on the original French nymphing leader. If you're into this stuff, I mean it. Go look some of this stuff up. I think it's really cool to see where it all started. And again, like go back and, fish some of those old leaders and see what you really can find.
Do you think a lot of those old leaders have the taper like we were talking about earlier? How much taper were they incorporating under the water? Do you think all of them had taper? Or is anyone running straight?
No, not so much straight, but there were always tapers. And for me...
Below the surface?
No, I don't mean... I'm glad you asked that. No.
Yeah, that's what my question is.
No, right. I'm glad you brought that up. No, to my understanding, there would be no taper. Your tippet was a level tippet under the water. The taper was meant to have some finesse in the casting.
Sure.
And to go from the powerful butt section to get down to that tippet section.
Mm-hmm.
And like I said, with some finesse, it's not really about it's going to turn over, but then it also thins up your leader. The taper thins up your leader. So what you have out of the rod tip is skinnier and skinnier and skinnier.
True.
So you have less and less and less sag. And then it becomes a more versatile tool as well. Because you can take these French leaders and check nymph them, high stick them. You can get really close.
Sure.
And just do that. Or you can back up, and if you have to, you get further away. So you have that versatility there. A French leader makes a fantastic Polish nymphing leader.
That's cool.
The last one to tackle here is Spanish nymphing, the last Euro nymphing tactic. So the idea is let's get even further out there without much drag. So extra thin leaders, like we're talking 3X, 4X butt sections, and then maybe that's even your sighter. And then you can go whatever tippet you want, 6X tippet, very thin leaders. And you can use heavy or light flies as the situation dictates. But the idea with the Spanish nymphing is just longer range, almost extreme long range with lighter leaders that have less sag and now less drag. So again, 5-pound butt section is going to sag so much less than a 20-pound butt section. It's just a fact.
Yep.
And so you can get out there further. And when we say extreme distance, to actually be tight, we'll talk about this more next week, I guess, but to actually be tight with a 5-pound butt section, if you try to do it more than 30 feet, you're going to sag.
Yeah, no doubt about it.
They all sag.
It's just too much line. When you get that far, you're going to have all that extra mass out of the rod tip. Yeah. No matter if it's 20-pound or 5-pound, you're going to feel those residual effects.
Yeah, you can see it. Yeah. So that's Euro nymphing. So I published an article in 2020 titled Beyond Euro nymphing. And I was trying to capture the sentiment that was coming about at the time that no one was really thinking in terms of French nymphing or Czech nymphing or Spanish nymphing anymore. Nobody that I ran into was going, I was Spanish nymphing today. But they kind of were. Yeah, they were. For, in 2015, 2018, you heard people saying that.
That's true.
I was French nymphing.
That's true.
Right? Or I was Czech nymphing. And of course, the tough thing is that people who weren't really, really dialed into this stuff would say, I was Czech nymphing. But they didn't, maybe they were French nymphing. It's like, they're the terms, man. They might say they were high sticking. I was just high sticking. But there's a lot more to it. So instead, each day, like each piece of water called for the next adaptation. And you didn't have people saying, oh, I just French nymph. Oh, I'm a Spanish nymph guy. They didn't say that anymore. Instead, you kind of chose a leader that you liked, and then you fished it in many different ways.
Yeah.
That's where we are now. So in that article, I also emphasized the point that we can do a lot of things with these rigs, and this is key.
Yeah.
These mono rigs. We could do a lot of things with these mono rigs beyond just Euro nymphing.
So in addition to just nymphing, right, we fish streamers on it. We indicator fish on a tight line. We fish dry dropper on a tight line. Yeah. We fish split shot and weighted flies for that sake. You can drop shot. You can even fish single dry flies on a tight line on the mono rig. Yeah. The idea is that we're kind of trying to take all of the advantages of everything we're talking about and putting it to use.
Yeah. Taking a tight line advantage even further with the mono rig. So anglers, I think, have become too locked into the restrictions of Euro nymphing, in quotes, system.
Sure.
I'm Euro nymphing. And I say too locked in. Not everybody. I just say there's your frame of reference again, right? If you just get into it and I'm going to Euro nymph.
Yeah.
I meet anglers all the time who are like afraid to add a split shot, or they say, no, I'm Euro nymph. I'm not going to put a indicator on here. The tight line tactics under competition rules and restrictions, that's what Euro nymphing is. And I say that because that's what French nymphing, Spanish nymphing, Czech and Polish nymphing were very much centered around. That's where those terms kind of came from too, is that competition scene.
Yeah.
So tight line tactics under competition rules and restrictions is really what Euro nymphing is. Now I get it. That term gets bent around more and more. And people will say, I was fishing a Euro rig. All they really mean is they're fishing a long leader.
Yeah.
Really a mono rig. There's nothing European about a long length of leader. Just like there's nothing, would you call it an American rig? A Mero rig? Right?
Right? No,
That's
I
why
wouldn't.
I kind of just stick with the term monorig because it describes the tool and not the tactic. So it doesn't limit you. Again, like you could say, who cares about the names of things? Well, it matters because the names of things will limit your understanding of things. It limit your versatility. You say, oh, I can't do that because I'm Euro-nymphing. No. You can do all these things that you just mentioned on the monorig.
Maybe it doesn't fit the strict definition though, right? Like we're going to talk about. The idea of adding split shot, you just said, if we're Euro-nymphing, truly Euro-nymphing, there's nothing attached to the leader but the flies. So we're not using split shot. There's no drop shot. There's no indicators of any kind.
Right.
Your leader can't be longer than twice your rod, which is the main reason a Euro fly line would exist.
Yeah.
Fly spacing is usually at least 20 inches apart. And those are the definitions that make Euro-nymphing the term that we've come to know. So when
those are the comp rules.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So if you're talking about your Euro rig with split shot on it, well, maybe you need to rethink your definition of it.
Well, it doesn't make a lot of sense. That's all.
It doesn't. It fails from the definition of what we're talking about.
Yeah. So none of those restrictions either are what make a tight line system work. And I always like to make that point. Again, frame of reference. If somebody puts a Euro-nymphing rig in your hands and you catch a ton of fish, you go, man, this is it. And it must be these flies that make it work. It's not the flies. It's not the flies. You could use a whole different set of flies and they could be unweighted. You could fish split shot. Yeah, obviously, you could fish streamers, all the stuff. So it's not the fly. It's not even the butt section. It's not even the leader build. It's just a tight line advantage. But okay, and we'll talk about that more next week.
Yeah.
In fact, it's those limitations that you just mentioned about leader length and fly spacing and nothing attached to the leader but the flies. Those limitations really take away a lot of great options. And I have a full article series. I'll link this. I have a full article series. I think it's 3 or 4 articles long about like what you're missing by fishing under FIPS rules. The FIPS is the regulating body, governing body, or whatever, that regulates the competitions.
Sure.
Many people get into Euro-nymphing, get into tight line nymphing really, and they accidentally kind of get into Euro-nymphing. And then they'll start following those rules and they will think that, I got to have these Euro-nymphing flies. It is not the flies that make it work. It's none of those restrictions.
Great
and in
point.
fact, it's the limitations that take a lot of those great options that you could be doing. The stuff you mentioned. Throw an Indy on there. Throw the split shot on there. Throw the drop shot. Throw streamers. Throw a dry fly. Single dry.
Yeah,
you can do a
there's
lot
no
of great
rules.
stuff. There's no rules. Right. And so we call it a monorig. That's why we call it a monorig, because that's the tool we use, because it doesn't come with limitations. So I have the leader in my hand. Instead of having a fly line in my stripping hand, I have a leader in my stripping hand. There's a lot of benefits to that. It feels a little weird at first. It doesn't take long to get over that strange feeling.
Yep.
And you start to love it because you get all that extra sensitivity and control. And we can do all that other stuff with it. That's why we call it a monorig. You can do all these different things. We call it a monorig because that's the tool that's being used.
And I think even the term monorig is becoming somewhat complex too.
Good point.
Just as much as Euro-nymphing is thrown around in sort of a conglomerate way of multiple tactics, the monorig term itself is becoming that way as well.
Yeah.
So basically, anglers now use the term monorig for any leader that's long enough to be held in your hand. Instead of the fly line, like you just mentioned. And there's massive differences between fishing let's say a 20-pound butt section monorig versus a 5-pound.
But it's all called a monorig these days.
Right.
It's
and
fair.
Well,
I mean, it's
which
what it
monorig
is.
are you fishing? Well, is it still a monorig? Because I've got the 5-pound version. Oh,
Yeah, I know.
Now it's a micro monorig.
Right.
Okay. The performances and the abilities of a 20-pound versus a 5-pound are completely different. You have to fish them differently and fish them with different intentions. So if you're talking to your buddy who's fishing 20-pound and you're fishing 5, your perspectives are going to differ.
That's nice.
But you're going to call it a monorig.
Yeah, that's so true. And this has only happened in the last 5 years, 5 years really. I mean, the micro monorig thing, again, it's Spanish nymphing, and that has really become popularized. I am shocked, honestly, by how quickly everyone has moved in that direction.
Yeah.
Almost all of the, let's say, educational materials that you will run across, whether that's video or books or even just social media posts or whatnot, everybody's showing you, hey, you got to fish a micro monorig or a micro rig, or you got You got to fish an ultralight system. Everything's about lighter, longer, thin to win. That's the education out there. And like I say, I'm kind of shocked how fast everybody has moved that direction. And it's not a bad direction. It's just a direction. It's not the only direction. It's just a direction. It's a way to go.
Yeah. And I think we've seen it probably too, if we outline the history here a little bit, as each new tactic or each new version of this comes about, people gravitate towards it because, well, now I need to learn that because maybe it could help me catch more fish. Oh, there's something over here. I'm going to go learn that next, which is excellent. We should always be looking to do that, right? So right now we're in a season where it's micro thin mono rigs, and that's what everybody's going towards to learn.
We talked in the What Has Changed in Fly Fishing podcast about the acceptance of these extreme, really, mono rigs. Basically, you go back to the guy that I was watching fishing worms and minnows on a fly rod with a fly reel, Berkeley Trilene 6 pound.
Yeah, right.
And that's what he was doing. And you take the worm off and you put a stonefly on there, and all of a sudden he's fishing a micro thin mono rig, or he's Spanish nymphing. That's what it is.
Yeah.
And so that wasn't accepted back then. Now it is. Now it's mainstream. It is mainstream.
Definitely.
I think that's cool. I do. Because you know me. And I know you're the same way all of us guys are. We're like, whatever works, man. Like,
Absolutely.
there's no pretense at Troutbitten. There really isn't. And we don't care. Like, what catches fish? Great. Squirmies? Okay. Doesn't work all the time. Whatever. We've been through it, right? Don't care. Whatever works. And I think it's neat, like that full acceptance, basically, not from everybody, but from a wide arc of the community. There's acceptance. So again, most of the educators are teaching micro thin stuff. I think that's neat. Now, the downside, if there is one, I think is that there's too much pushing people in just one direction. And so we've always been talking about versatility. Do this, do that. Do one thing, do the other thing. And, that's how I fish a lot. You guys make fun of me because I fish multiple leaders in one day, but I have the time on the water to do it, right?
Sure.
And we'll get into next week. We'll really break down the differences, the advantages and disadvantages of each of these styles of the mono rig. We'll talk again about these mono rigs, what we're going to call the standard, the thin, and the micro thin. They really have their counterparts in French nymphing or Spanish nymphing, for example. We'll talk about all those details next week with the other guys and what they like and what we've seen really works for this situation, but not for that situation, and vice versa. But Austin, before we get out of here, so we kind of walked through a lot of stuff there. We talked about where everything is right now. And if you go micro thin mono rig for nymphing, for tightline nymphing, you are now as far away as you can go because your leader is the skinniest that it can possibly be.
Sure.
Micro thin, let's say 2X, 3X, 4X especially, 5X maybe.
Yeah.
I guess there are people using like all 6X all the way to their fly.
I know some folks who fish 7X.
All the way? Like the butt section is 7X?
Yes, 7X butt section.
All right. So there you go. That's about, that is, I didn't know anybody did that. But, okay, that is literally as extreme as you can go. It almost disappears, right? It's like, it doesn't exist. You just got your fly out there. No influence, which is a misconception. There's always influence because it's attached to something. But anyway, that's the extreme, right? And again, it's accepted. It's accepted.
I think it is, right? When you look back through the years, did the person who started Spanish nymphing think, well, this is about as crazy as it gets? And then you look where we are here today.
Well,
I guess it is. I mean, it has to be.
Yeah. Well, that 7X rig, that all 7X rig is really like a Spanish nymphing extreme, right?
Oh, yeah, I guess.
Yeah.
But so where do we go after that?
That's the thing. That was going to be my next question. Like, where's it go?
We got this far, and we've got about as thin as we can.
I guess you can go to 8X.
Get
right.
Yeah, I guess we can.
That's it, though.
Here's my next idea then. So, do we get to the point here soon where we go back to heavier leaders? Maybe a 20-pound butt section becomes cool again. And we go cool. And we go through this the cycle. I don't know what we do after that.
Old school is cool.
That's right. But you have to wonder. You keep pushing it, and it seems like we pushed it as far as you can go. But the industry loves it so much that they're going to reach for the next thing. you know?
That is the end of the line, though. And that's kind of neat that we're at that point. We're at the end of the line.
Yeah.
It's very much accepted and taught
Right.
by many people. And then, again, you can't go any thinner. You can't go any further out there. I'm with you. I think it'll revert back. Not all the way back, but there'll be a middle ground. People will start to go, oh, well, you know what? That really extra thin stuff, it comes with a lot of consequences.
I think so too.
I don't like all those consequences, so I'm going to back up a bit. We're already seeing it. I meet many anglers who are really into this stuff, with guiding for troutbitten. And I see more tapered leaders, let's say, with like a 12-pound butt section, then a 10, 8, 6 step down, tippet ring, and then whatever, 6X, 5X.
Yeah.
Doesn't matter. I see that more and more now. And I think it's already going back that way.
Oh, tippet rings are too heavy, Dom.
My 1.5 millimeter tippet ring is too heavy.
No, it's too heavy. You can't.
The backing barrel is adding weight. Got to get rid of that.
Yeah. Like we say, why don't you just clip off 3 inches of leader and keep that tippet ring on instead?
So you see the damn cider.
Yeah. Really?
Or add 10 centigrams to your
counterweight.
Yep, to counteract the effect of the butt section. There's so much to it, right?
Yeah.
10 to win is not the answer. Is sometimes the answer. Sometimes it wins, but it does not always win. Nothing always wins. Look at the NFL. Chiefs don't
They're
always
not
win.
thin at all.
No, but really, I mean, where does it go? Like, that is a cool question.
I don't know, but yeah, I often think about it.
Where's it go? I mean, I think it's going to go back a little bit because I was thinking about this today when I was fishing streamers, and I fished a half pint, which is 2.5 to 3 inches long. It was about 3 inches long.
Mm-hmm.
Number 4 hook. And I actually only caught 2 fish. I caught one and missed one on it. And I fished it for a half hour too. So things were not great. That's not my point.
On streamers.
Not my point, Austin. I could have caught as many as I wanted to.
You really wanted to.
If I really wanted, I was just working on my tactics.
Typical.
Anyway, I was thinking about it because, what was it, 2003, I think, when Gallup came out with modern streamers for trophy trout, and everybody started fishing articulated streamers. And what was thought to be a pretty big streamer, like the one I was fishing today of 3 inches, that used to be a pretty big streamer. All of a sudden, you were like, whoa, that's a little streamer, because you were fishing 4, 5, 6 inch streamers. And that got pushed. I'm going to say, to its extreme. And here's my analogy.
Good
you see
point. Yes.
And so that 7, 8 inch streamers people were fishing, maybe 9, maybe 10, I don't know, like musky flies for trout. Push it to that extreme. And that happened. It took a decade. It literally took more than a decade. It took like 15 years before people finally started to turn around and go, wait a second. All I get is these drive-bys and these slashes and these, I'm not catching trout.
Yeah.
And my buddy's down there fishing a 3 inch streamer, and he's catching the biggest trout in the river. And so everything kind of backed up from the extreme point, backed up a little bit and went, oh, okay, 3, 4, maybe 5 inches, maybe 6. I don't know. Like, you draw your lines wherever. But it's certainly backed up. And Gallup himself said in a video not too long ago, they sell more mini sex dungeons than, is it okay to say sex, Austin?
Yeah, it's okay.
It's what it is. It's a sex dungeon. Deal with it. So they sell more mini dungeons than full size because they catch more fish, right? And they can catch the biggest fish in the river. You get it. That's my point. Like, you get to the extreme and you maybe back up to where things are, where they work best. I don't want to say reasonable, just where they seem to work best. That's what we want.
I wouldn't be surprised if we land somewhere like a 12-pound a 12-pound butt section become the more reasonable norm. Because, I don't know, I think more people are fishing streamers on mono rigs more than ever.
Right.
And realizing they can do that, and dry flies for that matter. And they're realizing, unless you want to kind of pitch or sling streamers around, you need a little bit more backbone in that leader build. Yeah. And you can do a whole lot still with 15-pound, 20-pound.
Oh, so. Yeah. And my micro rig is 5 pound. And when I feel that limitation all the time. When I'm fishing that, I go, I'd like to fish a streamer in that little corner over there. Shit, I got a micro rig on. And it's not that I couldn't fish with it, but I have very little confidence that with my 5-pound butt section, my 4X or 5X sighter, and then my 6X tippet that I could tie a streamer on, get the big hit from that trout who goes the other way, and then I can set and actually stay connected. All the things that there's the casting that I'm not a big fan of either, with that extra weight and the micro thin leader. I just feel the limitation. You can feel it, literally feel it. Feel the reason that you don't want to switch. That's how I feel anyway.
Right.
Talk more about that next week. I think those are good things. But we don't know where we're going. That's our answer.
No, we don't.
I'm with you. I think it'll back up a bit. It'll be interesting to see what educators, let's say, are teaching 5 years from now. My gosh, do things change quickly, right?
I think so. And will nymphing still be the focus?
Well,
or what are they going to do? What are they going to do? But what's the thing going to be after maybe the Euro nymphing is dried up a little bit in terms of interest?
Well, it was big articulated streamers. That was the first thing of the internet age. That's my argument.
Right.
And then Euro nymphing was the second thing of the internet age for fly fishing. I don't know what's next, but I do think it's really helpful and very interesting. Just kind of follow along, but see how quickly things change now compared to before. We said like high sticking kind of became a thing back in the 40s, right? As soon as monofilament was extruded, and then they started taking it further. Maybe it was happening, but people weren't talking about it. And to be honest, because people weren't talking about it, because magazine articles weren't being written about it, people weren't doing it. That's how fishermen learn. They learn from the next magazine article. These days, the next YouTube video and whatnot. It wasn't there. Joe Humphreys wasn't allowed to tell them outside of his trout tactics book that monorig would be a good thing for them.
Good point.
So it didn't happen until internet just allowed people like me on Troutbitten with my website to say like, hey, the monorig and why fly line sucks. And that really introduced a lot of people to it. It definitely helped to kind of raise some awareness that these other things are possible.
Hey, if you came back to your vehicle the other day and had a Troutbitten sticker on it, and someone wrote "Hey now," and put their initials next to it, might be Dominic.
I showed up this morning, 8:15. Somebody was parked there, Toyota Tacoma, I'm pretty sure it was. Gray one, only other vehicle in the lot. Saw only two other anglers while I was out there. And I came back, and that car it had to be the same people I passed. Anyway, I thought it was cool. They did have the Troutbitten logo sticker. So they had a very dusty vehicle because it takes some dust to get back there.
Yeah.
And I wrote, "Hey now." And I put my initials there, right by the sticker. I thought that was cool.
That is cool. As opposed to what we do to each other's vehicles, which is
raise the
mess the mirrors up and raise the windshield wipers. And
so I swear to God,
suck it on the back window.
Right.
You were probably tempted.
Draw like balls on the back. That's what Grobe would do.
Definitely.
He's probably really good at that. Drawing that real quick. Just as quick as I can write my name.
He's done it 1,000 times.
Grobe can probably draw balls. Anyway, this was good. Anything else, bud? Did we miss anything?
In the words of Josh Darling, nope.
Josh's like, nope, ready to get out of here. Gotta get to bed. I get up at like 4:30 every morning.
Yeah, he does, yeah.
We'll really dig into the details next week about...
performance and how they work and how we like to do it.
All right, there it is. High sticking, Polish and Czech nymphing, French nymphing and standard mono rigs, Spanish nymphing and micro leaders. I suppose we use the terms tight lining and contact nymphing to encompass a wide range of these tactics too, but even that might lead to confusion, as tight line tactics are often best when you're not all that tight to the flies, because sometimes less contact encourages more trout to eat the fly. If all of this seems a little much for the simple idea of taking a small fake nymph to the trout, well, you're not the first person to think that. And while we might wish that nymphing could be as easy as casting a fly upstream and letting it drift down current, we quickly learn that acknowledging the complexities and dealing with the realities of a moving river leads to more success. Wild trout, especially, are picky. They know their water better than we ever will, and they surely know how a sulfur mayfly nymph drifts around that rock and slides into the soft seam just in front of them. That's why the trout is sitting there. Most times, if our nymph doesn't do the same thing, it is simply ignored. I had a music teacher who shared with me this quote from legendary saxophone player Charlie Parker, and it's always stuck with me. Master your instrument, master the music, and then forget about all that bullshit and just play. We love fly fishing because it provides so many chances to be creative on the water. We move and flow with the river. We cast in rhythm, search for answers to daily mysteries, and craft solutions to match the natural world around us. Our instrument is the line and leader. The music is in our dance with the river and its trout. So we surrender to the complexity. We embrace it. Then we attempt to master the tools in our hands until we forget about all of that and just fish. Next week, the full Troutbitten crew joins me for an in-depth discussion regarding the strengths and weaknesses of all these leader styles. We're looking forward to it. See you then. All right then, Austin Dando, will you read us out?
I will. Remember, the Troutbitten Project is a free resource for all anglers. The Troutbitten website hosts over 1,000 articles with endless stories, commentaries, tactics, tips, and more. Find what you like through the top menu and through the search page. Navigate by way of the categories and tags too. Be sure to find the Troutbitten YouTube channel, now featuring the Troutbitten Tips series, the Fish and Film series, and the Troutbitten Fly Box, all in collaboration with Wilds Media.
Yeah.
Thank you for listening to the Troutbitten Podcast. Please, please, please give the show a 5-star rating on Apple Podcasts
Do that.
or Spotify.
Come on,
and leave
man.
a comment because it really helps. We promise it does. Until next time, friends, fish hard, enjoy the day, and find your life on the water.
On the water. Then it doesn't look good. Then the fish don't eat it.
They don't eat it.
They won't eat it.
Well, yeah, I mean, that's what I'm doing.
Vladdy had no cider.
That's true.
It's disclaimers right from the top.